Enough. Trump broke the law. Todd Blanche, you did not come here today to protect Donald Trump. You came here to defend the law, answer our questions, and stop hiding behind excuses. Senator Chris Coons didn't whisper those words. He fired them across the hearing room like a warning shot. Everyone knew this was no longer a routine hearing, but here's what no one tells you about what happened next. Todd Blanche, the man nominated to become one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the United States, sat at that witness table and could not answer a math question, not a constitutional theory, not a complex legal doctrine, a math question. And the excuse he gave was the moment everything changed. Because this was not about a complicated legal argument. It was about a number every person in that room understood. This story begins 30 days before that hearing room exploded. President Trump had just signed the paperwork. Multiple inspector generals, the independent watchdogs built into the federal government specifically to stop abuse of power, were fired, gone, overnight, no notice. No explanation. No 30-day warning to Congress as legally required. One of them, the Inspector General at USAID, had just published a report warning that recent budget cuts made it statistically more likely that American funds would end up in the hands of terrorist organizations. He published that report on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, he was fired, and nobody at the White House said a single word to Congress before it happened. Now remember that detail. Burn it into your memory. Because when Senator Coons walked into that hearing room with a calendar in one hand and the law in the other, everything was about to collide, and Todd Blanche would have nowhere left to run. The confirmation hearing for Todd Blanche had drawn unusual attention from the start. This was not a typical nominee. Blanche had personally represented Donald Trump through 2 criminal trials. He had argued in federal court that the former president deserved special treatment. He had built his entire recent career on one client, one loyalty, one relationship. And now he was being asked to swear an oath to the Constitution, to the same Constitution that Trump had allegedly violated 30 days earlier. Coons entered the room last. He carried a leather folder. Inside it, a calendar, a statute, and 3 years of documented evidence. His jaw was set. His eyes were focused. He had the look of a man who had already decided how this conversation was going to end. The opening exchanges were calm. Almost dangerously calm. Coons asked Blanche foundational questions, the kind that sound easy but aren't. If a prosecutor brings you an airtight case against someone connected to the White House and the president personally asks you to drop it, would you? Blanche's hand stayed still on the table. His voice was measured. I will follow the law, he said. Clean, simple, rehearsed. If the White House pressures you to begin a prosecution you know isn't legally justified, would you? I will follow the law. Same answer. Same tone. Same carefully constructed non-commitment dressed up as principle. Coons nodded slowly. He let the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then he moved to the case that was already on every front page in America. The sudden, unexplained decision to drop the prosecution of New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Widely reported reason, Adams had pledged to cooperate with deportation enforcement. Not a legal defect in the case. Not new evidence. Not a prosecutorial reassessment, a political arrangement, favor for favor, cooperation for immunity. Blanche shifted in his chair for the first time. I don't believe what the media says, he offered, his voice losing just a fraction of its earlier confidence. I have no idea what the basis was for that decision. No idea. The man about to run the Department of Justice had no idea why one of the most high-profile prosecutorial decisions of the year had just been made. The reporters in the gallery exchanged glances. The staff members along the wall stopped writing. Something was already wrong here, and Coons had barely started. But then, the pivot, the moment the entire hearing had been quietly, methodically building toward. Coons placed a document on the table. Not a theory, not a media report, a statute. The Securing Inspector General Independence Act, passed with bipartisan support in 2022. The language was not complicated. Before removing any inspector general, the president must provide Congress with at least 30 days advance notice, along with, and this is a direct quote from the law, a substantive rationale, including detailed and case-specific reasons. Not a courtesy, not a tradition, not a custom honored by past administrations. A law, black letters on white paper, passed by Congress, signed into binding federal statute, and President Trump had fired a dozen inspector generals without a single word of notice. Coons looked directly at Blanche. No theatrics, no raised voice, no dramatic pause for effect. Just the cold, clinical precision of a former prosecutor who already knows the answer and is about to make the witness say it out loud. You are a lawyer, Coons said. How many days has the president been in office? The room went silent. Blanche blinked. Since January 20th, he said carefully, which is how many days fewer than 30. And here, right here, is the moment that stopped Washington cold. Todd Blanche, the attorney nominated to lead the most powerful law enforcement institution in the world, looked into the lens of a national television camera and said with no trace of irony and no visible shame, "I'm a lawyer, not a math guy." The reaction was immediate. Everyone understood what that answer meant. Coons didn't flinch. He didn't laugh. His expression didn't change by a single degree. He leaned slightly forward, and his voice dropped into something far more dangerous than anger. It dropped into absolute, unshakable certainty. I don't see anything amusing about this conversation, Mr. Blanche. Watch your words carefully. You are under oath. Because what Blanche had just done wasn't a slip. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't an unguarded moment from a tired nominee. It was a reveal. A man who had spent decades in federal courtrooms, a man who had prosecuted complex financial crimes involving multi-layered international fraud, a man who had defended a former president through 2 criminal trials and navigated every legal complexity those cases produced, was now claiming he could not calculate whether 10 days is fewer than 30. Not because he couldn't, because the answer destroyed every single defense available to him. If Trump had been in office fewer than 30 days, and he had been, then the mathematical reality was not a matter of interpretation. It was not a question of competing legal theories or constitutional gray zones. It was simply factually, provably impossible for President Trump to have given Congress 30 days' notice before those firings. Impossible. The central question was whether the law had been violated, and nobody in that room wanted to answer it. The only remaining question, and the only question that mattered in that room, was whether anyone with the authority to say so would finally say it out loud. Coons pressed forward, his voice steady as concrete. It is a matter of mathematical impossibility for the president to have followed the statute and provided the required notice, correct? Blanche's pen, which had been resting loosely between his fingers for the last hour, was now gripped so tight his knuckles had shifted color. He swallowed. And then, in a voice that came out smaller than anything he had said that morning, he obviously did not provide 30 days' notice. The admission detonated in that hearing room. Ripples moved visibly through the press gallery, journalists leaning toward each other, phones already moving to file the clip. Aides along the wall stopped mid-sentence. Republican committee members stared at the table. Democratic members sat back, the same expression on every face. They had gotten what they came for, and they knew it. Blanche had just confirmed, under oath before a national audience, in front of the committee responsible for overseeing the Department of Justice he was about to lead, that the President of the United States had failed to comply with a legally binding statutory requirement. He had not hedged it. He had not qualified it. He had not said reportedly or allegedly or according to some interpretations. He said, obviously, did not. Then Coons asked the question the entire hearing had been marching toward since the moment he walked through that door. Do you think he broke the law by firing these inspectors general? And just like that, the mask came back on, like a switch had been thrown. I wasn't part of the decisions, Blanche said, his voice suddenly calm and controlled again, the way a man sounds when he has found the exact phrase he rehearsed for this moment. I don't want to speak to whether the president broke the law. I just don't know. You don't know. The words landed like a closed door. You, a federal attorney, a man who just acknowledged under oath that the president was mathematically incapable of following a statute he was legally required to follow. Don't know if that constitutes breaking the law, the same math, the same impossibility you just described with your own mouth, on your own record, with your own voice. Coons turned to the second nominee seated beside Blanche, Gail Slater, nominated to lead the Antitrust Division. He asked her the same question, simple, direct, unavoidable. On the face of these facts, did the president break the law? Slater's jaw tightened visibly. Her eyes stayed rigidly forward. Her hands folded neatly on the table did not move. I'm not going to give you the answer you're looking for, she said. Then with remarkable composure for someone voluntarily driving into a wall, she added, I refuse to sit here and give an answer just because you want it. The silence that followed lasted 8 full seconds. Not 2, not 5. 8 seconds. An eternity in a congressional hearing, where the most powerful oversight committee in the United States Senate sat in perfect, crushing quiet, while 2 nominees for senior federal law enforcement positions refused to confirm that a mathematical impossibility was a legal violation. 8 seconds where the cameras recorded everything, where the record was written, where history, without ceremony or announcement, quietly took note. Because here is what makes this confrontation different from every other congressional exchange that gets clipped and shared and forgotten inside a week. It was not the anger, it was not the theater, it was the specificity, the stamped date, the cited statute, the calendar that could not be argued with, that made it impossible to escape, impossible to spin, and impossible to explain away. The law is still on the books, every word of it. The inspectors general are still gone. The one at USAID, the one who warned about American funds potentially reaching terrorist organizations and was fired the very next day, is still fired. And the 2 people who sat before the United States Senate and refused to say that removing him without legally required notice violated the law have since been confirmed to lead the very institution responsible for enforcing that law. That is not a hypothetical. That is not an allegation. That is the documented, confirmed, sworn testimony record of what happened. Every time Todd Blanche steps into a federal courtroom and invokes the rule of law, remember this room. Remember the calendar. Remember the math question. Remember the 8 seconds of silence when the answer should have taken less than 1. And remember the 1 sentence that should have been said that wasn't. So we are asking you right now, drop into the comments below and answer this. If Todd Blanche couldn't tell a Senate committee whether the president broke a law he himself admitted was mathematically impossible to follow, what exactly is he there to protect? The Constitution or the man who appointed him? Tell us why. Because this is where the real debate begins. Write it. Don't scroll past. Because Washington reads these comments. And right now, they need to know that you do too.